In the late 18th century, France was a nation divided by social, economic, and political inequalities. The absolute monarchy, led by King Louis XVI, faced growing discontent among the populace, exacerbated by financial crises and a burgeoning Enlightenment spirit. In the years leading up to the French Revolution, France found itself mired in a myriad of social, economic, and political challenges. The seeds of discontent were sown deeply within the fabric of French society, setting the stage for one of the most tumultuous periods in history. France was governed by the ancient Argaim, a system characterized by absolute monarchy, feudal privileges, and a rigid social hierarchy. The king, Louis XVI, held vast power, while the nobility and clergy enjoyed privileges and exemptions from taxation. The French state faced dire financial straits exacerbated by years of war expenditure, including support for the American Revolution. Mounting debt and fiscal mismanagement left the treasury depleted and the government scrambling for solutions. French society was divided into three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners' third estate. The third estate, comprising the majority of the population, bore the burden of taxation without representation, fueling resentment and class tensions. The Enlightenment, a period of intellectual ferment, spread ideas of reason, liberty, and equality across Europe. French thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu challenged traditional authority and advocated for democratic principles, inspiring revolutionary fervor. King Louis XVI's reign was marked by indecisiveness, fiscal irresponsibility, and a lack of effective governance. His attempts at reform were often stymied by resistance from the privileged classes, further exacerbating discontent among the populace. Poor harvests and rising food prices exacerbated by outdated agricultural practices led to widespread famine and suffering among the peasantry. Rural discontent simmered as grievances against feudal landlords and burdensome taxes intensified. The spread of literacy and the proliferation of print culture facilitated the dissemination of revolutionary ideas among the masses. Coffee houses, salons, and literary societies became hotbeds of dissent, fostering a culture of critique and debate. The monarchy's failures to address the nation's pressing problems eroded public trust and confidence in the established order. Calls for reform and accountability grew louder as dissatisfaction with the status quo reached a boiling point. The success of the American Revolution against British colonial rule served as a potent symbol of liberation and inspired French revolutionaries. The ideals of freedom, democracy, and self-determination resonated deeply with those seeking change in France. France's defeat in the 7 Years' War and subsequent loss of colonial territories to Britain and Spain undermined national pride and exposed the weaknesses of the monarchy. The military setbacks fueled disillusionment with the ruling elite and their ability to govern effectively. As these factors converged, France stood on the brink of revolution. The stage was set for a cataclysmic upheaval that would reshape the course of history and usher in a new era of political and social transformation. The French Revolution was fueled by deep-seated socio-economic disparities that plagued French society during the late 18th century. These grievances, rooted in centuries of feudalism and exacerbated by financial mismanagement, drove the common people to demand radical change. French society was structured into three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners' third estate. The first two estates, comprising the clergy and nobility, enjoyed vast privileges, including exemption from taxation and lucrative land ownership, while the third estate were the burden of taxes and feudal dues. The third estate, which encompassed the vast majority of the population, was heavily taxed to support the extravagant lifestyles of the nobility and clergy. Peasants endured a myriad of taxes, including the hated tar land tax, gabelle salt tax, and corvée forced labor, which often left them impoverished and destitute. The gap between the wealthy elite and the impoverished masses widened as economic opportunities remained limited for the common people. The aristocracy monopolized key positions of power and privilege, while the peasantry struggled to eke out a living from the land they often did not own. The rural peasantry, comprising the majority of the French population, faced dire poverty and hardship Many peasants were tenant farmers or sharecroppers, subject to exploitative land tenure arrangements that left them with meager earnings and little control over their livelihoods. In urban centers, a burgeoning working class faced similar economic hardships. Artisans, laborers, and urban poor grappled with low wages, unemployment, and rising food prices, exacerbating social tensions and discontent with the ruling elite. Poor harvests and food shortages, exacerbated by outdated agricultural practices and distribution systems, led to widespread famine and hunger among the rural and urban poor. Rising bread prices, a staple of the French diet, sparked riots and unrest in cities across the country. France's involvement in costly wars, including the American Revolution, drained the treasury and left the monarchy deeply in debt. Attempts to address the financial crisis through taxation and fiscal reforms only exacerbated the burden on the common people, further fueling resentment and unrest. The monarchy's failure to address the nation's pressing socio-economic problems eroded public trust and confidence in the established order. King Louis XVI's perceived extravagance and detachment from the plight of the common people further fueled discontent and calls for reform. Enlightenment thinkers, such as Rousseau and Voltaire, critiqued the existing socio-economic order and advocated for political and social reform. Their ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity resonated with those suffering under the weight of feudalism and economic oppression, galvanizing support for revolutionary change. As socio-economic disparities deepened and grievances against the monarchy intensified, revolutionary sentiment began to take hold among the common people. Calls for justice, equality, and the redistribution of wealth became rallying cries for those seeking to overthrow the old order and usher in a new era of social and economic justice. The financial crisis that gripped France in the late 18th century played a pivotal role in precipitating the French Revolution. Rooted in a combination of economic mismanagement, extravagant spending, and mounting debt, the crisis exposed the weaknesses of the ancient regime and fueled popular discontent. France's involvement in costly wars, including the 7 Years' War and the American Revolutionary War, placed a tremendous strain on the state's finances. Heavy military expenditure drained the treasury and left the monarchy grappling with mounting debt. By the late 1780s, France was on the brink of bankruptcy, unable to service its massive debt obligations. Years of deficit spending, coupled with a stagnant economy and inefficient taxation system, pushed the state to the brink of financial collapse. The French taxation system was riddled with inefficiencies and loopholes that allowed the privileged classes, such as the clergy and nobility, to evade taxes while placing the burden disproportionately on the common people. Corruption and nepotism further undermined revenue collection efforts, exacerbating the financial crisis. King Louis XVI's attempts to address the financial crisis through fiscal reforms were met with resistance from the nobility and clergy, who opposed any measures that threatened their privileges. The king's indecisiveness and lack of effective leadership exacerbated the nation's fiscal woes. To finance its deficits, the French government resorted to borrowing heavily from domestic and foreign sources, including banks and wealthy financiers. Interest payments on the mounting debt consumed a significant portion of state revenues, further straining the treasury. France's economy was plagued by stagnation and inefficiency, hindered by archaic feudal practices, restrictive guild regulations, and monopolies controlled by the privileged classes. The lack of economic growth exacerbated the state's financial difficulties and contributed to widespread poverty and unemployment. The financial crisis exacerbated social tensions and unrest, as the burden of taxation fell disproportionately on the common people, while the nobility and clergy enjoyed exemptions and privileges. Growing inequality and economic hardship fueled resentment and discontent among the populace. The fiscal crisis prompted calls for fiscal reform and greater accountability from the monarchy. The convening of the Estates General in 1789 provided an opportunity for representatives of the three estates to address the nation's fiscal woes and demand structural reforms. Efforts to implement fiscal reforms, such as the proposal to tax the nobility and clergy, were thwarted by resistance from vested interests. The inability of the monarchy to enact meaningful reform exacerbated popular disillusionment and set the stage for revolutionary upheaval. The financial crisis of the late 18th century exposed the inherent weaknesses of the ancient regime and contributed to its eventual downfall. The burden of fiscal mismanagement, debt and economic stagnation fueled popular discontent and provided fertile ground for revolutionary fervor, ultimately leading to the outbreak of the French Revolution in 1789. The intellectual Enlightenment played a crucial role in laying the ideological groundwork for the French Revolution. This era of intellectual ferment, characterized by rationalism, skepticism, and a commitment to reason, liberty, and progress, challenged traditional authority and inspired revolutionary fervor among the French populace. Enlightenment thinkers, such as Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu, and Diderot, championed reason, scientific inquiry, and individual liberty. Their writings critiqued the absolute monarchy, religious dogma, and social inequality, laying the philosophical foundations for revolutionary change. Enlightenment philosophers condemned the absolute monarchy and its arbitrary exercise of power. They advocated for constitutional government, separation of powers, and the rule of law as essential safeguards against tyranny and despotism. Rousseau's concept of the social contract challenged the divine right of kings and asserted that legitimate political authority derived from the consent of the governed. This idea of popular sovereignty resonated with those seeking to challenge the autocratic rule of the monarchy. Enlightenment thinkers articulated the concept of natural rights, including the rights to life, liberty, and property, as inherent and inalienable rights that governments were obligated to respect and protect. These ideas of individual rights and freedoms fueled demands for political and social reform. Enlightenment philosophy fostered a spirit of skepticism and critical inquiry that challenged traditional religious beliefs, superstitions, and dogmas. The pursuit of knowledge and truth encouraged a questioning of authority and entrenched social hierarchies. The proliferation of printed materials, including books, pamphlets, and newspapers, facilitated the dissemination of Enlightenment ideas to a wider audience. Coffeehouses, salons, and literary societies became intellectual hubs where discussions of politics, philosophy, and social reform flourished. The Encyclopédie, edited by Denis Diderot and Jean-Élie Rond d'Alembert, was a monumental multi-volume work that aimed to compile and disseminate knowledge across various fields, including philosophy, science, and politics. It played a pivotal role in spreading Enlightenment ideas and challenging traditional authority. Enlightenment thinkers critiqued the power and influence of the Roman Catholic Church, advocating for religious tolerance, freedom of thought, and separation of church and state. Their critiques of religious institutions and doctrines contributed to the erosion of the Church's authority and legitimacy. Enlightenment ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity provided the ideological framework for the French Revolution. Revolutionary leaders, inspired by Enlightenment philosophy, sought to dismantle the old order and establish a new social and political order based on principles of reason and human rights. The convocation of the Estates General in 1789 marked a watershed moment in French history, setting the stage for the French Revolution. This assembly, comprised of representatives from the three estates of French society, was convened by King Louis XVI in response to mounting financial and social crises. However, far from resolving the nation's problems, the Estates General became a catalyst for revolutionary upheaval. The Estates General was an ancient representative assembly that had not been convened since 1614. It consisted of three estates: the clergy First Estate, the nobility Second Estate, and the commoners Third Estate. Its primary purpose was to advise the king on matters of state and to approve new taxes. France was mired in socio-economic discontent, with the commoners bearing the brunt of taxation and feudal obligations, while the clergy and nobility enjoyed privileges and exemptions. The convocation of the Estates General provided an opportunity for grievances to be aired and reforms to be proposed. Each estate was granted one vote, despite the fact that the Third Estate represented the vast majority of the population. This unequal representation meant that the privileged estates could easily outvote the commoners, frustrating attempts at reform and exacerbating tensions. Prior to the convocation of the Estates General, grievances were compiled in documents known as Cahiers de doléances, or books of grievances. These documents, drawn up by representatives of each estate, outlined the grievances and demands of the people, ranging from calls for fiscal reform to demands for political representation. The Estates General was officially opened by King Louis XVI on May 5, 1789, in Versailles. The representatives of the three estates gathered in separate chambers to deliberate on the nation's affairs, with the Third Estate calling for a unified assembly to address the nation's problems. A major point of contention arose over the issue of voting procedures. The Third Estate, representing the commoners, demanded that votes be counted by head one vote per representative, rather than by estate one vote per estate. This demand was fiercely opposed by the clergy and nobility, leading to a deadlock. Frustrated by the stalemate, representatives of the Third Estate, led by figures such as Emmanuel Joseph Sire and Maximilien Robespierre, declared themselves the National Assembly on June 17, 1789. They vowed to represent the interests of the common people and to enact meaningful reform. On June 20, 1789, members of the National Assembly, finding themselves locked out of their usual meeting place, convened on a nearby tennis court and took a solemn oath not to disband until a new constitution had been established. This defiant act marked a decisive break with the monarchy and signaled the onset of revolutionary fervor. King Louis XVI, alarmed by the growing defiance of the National Assembly, attempted to assert his authority by ordering the closure of the meeting hall and dispatching troops to Versailles. However, his actions only served to galvanize popular support for the National Assembly and further inflame revolutionary sentiments. The convocation of the Estates General, far from resolving the nation's problems, intensified social and political tensions and set the stage for the French Revolution. The defiance of the Third Estate, culminating in the formation of the National Assembly and the Tennis Court Oath, marked a turning point in French history, leading to the eventual overthrow of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic. The Tennis Court Oath, a defining moment of the French Revolution, epitomized the resolve of the Third Estate to challenge the authority of the monarchy and establish a new order based on principles of liberty and equality. This historic event, which took place on June 20, 1789, at the Jeu de Paume Tennis Court in Versailles, demonstrated the unity and determination of the representatives of the common people to enact meaningful political reform. The convocation of the Estates General in May 1789 had plunged France into a state of political turmoil. Discontent with the existing socio-economic order, coupled with frustrations over unequal representation within the Assembly, fueled calls for reform and greater political participation. Representatives of the Third Estate, comprising the vast majority of the population, found themselves marginalized within the Estates General due to the archaic voting system that favored the privileged estates. Frustrated by their lack of influence and determined to assert their rights, they sought to break the impasse and demand change. In response to the deadlock over voting procedures, the representatives of the Third Estate, led by figures such as Emmanuel Joseph Sire and Maximilien Robespierre, declared themselves the National Assembly on June 17, 1789. They vowed to represent the interests of the common people and to pursue political reform. On June 20, 1789, the National Assembly found their usual meeting hall at Versailles closed and guarded by royal troops, who had been deployed by King Louis XVI in an attempt to assert his authority. Undeterred by this show of force, the representatives of the Third Estate sought an alternative venue to convene. Unable to access their designated meeting place, the members of the National Assembly gathered at the nearby Jeu de Paume, a tennis court, where they resolved to continue their deliberations and not disband until a new constitution had been established. This symbolic act of defiance signaled their commitment to political change and refusal to be intimidated by the monarchy. Amidst the tense atmosphere, Jean Sylvan Bailey, the president of the National Assembly, led the representatives in a solemn oath, declaring,
"We swear never to separate ourselves from the National Assembly, and to reassemble wherever circumstances require, until the constitution of the realm is drawn up and fixed upon solid foundations."
This oath, known as the Tennis Court Oath, affirmed their unity and determination to pursue their goals. The Tennis Court Oath provoked alarm and outrage among supporters of the monarchy, who viewed it as a challenge to royal authority. King Louis XVI, alarmed by the growing defiance of the National Assembly, attempted to assert his control, but ultimately relented in the face of widespread popular support for the representatives of the common people. The tennis court oath symbolized the triumph of popular sovereignty over absolute monarchy and marked a pivotal moment in the French Revolution. It galvanized public support for the National Assembly and inspired revolutionary fervor among the populace, laying the groundwork for the drafting of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen and the eventual abolition of the monarchy. The tennis court oath remains a powerful symbol of political defiance and unity in the face of oppression. It exemplifies the determination of ordinary citizens to assert their rights and demand political representation, leaving a lasting legacy in the annals of revolutionary history. The tennis court oath stands as a testament to the courage and resolve of the representatives of the Third Estate to challenge the entrenched power structures of the ancient regime and pave the way for a new era of democratic governance in France. It remains a defining moment in the struggle for liberty, equality, and fraternity that continues to resonate in the collective memory of the French people and the world at large. The storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, stands as one of the most iconic events of the French Revolution, marking the beginning of a new era of popular uprising and revolutionary fervor. This dramatic assault on the Bastille, a symbol of royal tyranny and oppression, galvanized the masses and signaled the overthrow of the ancient regime. The Bastille, a fortress prison in Paris, symbolized the despotic rule of the Bourbon monarchy. It was a symbol of royal authority and a tool of political repression, used to detain and silence dissenters without trial. In the summer of 1789, tensions in Paris were running high as economic hardship, political discontent, and social inequality fueled popular unrest. The convocation of the Estates General and the formation of the National Assembly had failed to address the grievances of the common people, leading to widespread disillusionment with the monarchy. Rumors spread that King Louis XVI, alarmed by the growing unrest, was planning to use military force to suppress the burgeoning revolutionary movement. Fearing an attack, the people of Paris sought to arm themselves and secure weapons and ammunition. On July 14th, a mob of several thousand Parisians, including armed militia and members of the National Guard, marched on the HDLD's Invalides, a military hospital and armory, in search of weapons. They successfully seized a large cache of arms and gunpowder, bolstering their resolve to challenge royal authority. Buoyed by their success at the Invalides, the crowd turned their attention to the nearby Bastille, which they perceived as a symbol of tyranny and oppression. The fortress, garrisoned by a small number of Swiss and French guards, was ill-prepared to withstand a determined assault. The crowd surrounded the Bastille and demanded its surrender, threatening to storm the fortress if their demands were not met. Governor Bernard Delaunay, faced with the prospect of a violent confrontation, hesitated to use force against the crowd. As tensions mounted, negotiations between Delaunay and the leaders of the mob proved futile. Sensing the imminent danger, Delaunay ordered his men to open fire on the crowd, sparking a fierce exchange of gunfire. Despite the initial resistance, the revolutionaries, armed with makeshift weapons and sheer determination, managed to breach the defenses of the Bastille. After several hours of intense fighting, the fortress fell to the revolutionary forces, and Governor Delaunay surrendered. The storming of the Bastille was a symbolic victory for the revolutionaries, signaling the triumph of popular sovereignty over royal authority. The fall of the Bastille became a rallying cry for the revolutionary movement, inspiring hope and solidarity among the common people. The storming of the Bastille marked the beginning of the French Revolution and the overthrow of the ancient regime. It ignited a wave of revolutionary fervor across France and paved the way for the establishment of a new political order based on principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The Bastille Day, commemorated annually on July 14th, remains a national holiday in France, symbolizing the triumph of the people over tyranny and the enduring legacy of the French Revolution. The Great Fear, a period of widespread panic and peasant uprisings that swept through rural France in the summer of 1789, was a pivotal moment in the French Revolution. This wave of unrest, fueled by economic hardship, social inequality, and political uncertainty, shook the foundations of the ancient regime and contributed to the collapse of feudalism. In the years leading up to the French Revolution, France was plagued by economic hardship, exacerbated by poor harvests, rising food prices, and widespread poverty. The peasantry, already burdened by heavy taxation and feudal obligations, struggled to make ends meet as their livelihoods were threatened by famine and destitution. The rural peasantry, comprising the majority of the French population, bore the brunt of feudal oppression under the ancient regime. They were subject to onerous feudal dues, obligations, and tithes imposed by the nobility and clergy, which often left them impoverished and marginalized. Rural communities were gripped by fear and paranoia amidst rumors of aristocratic plots to suppress the burgeoning revolutionary movement. Tales of aristocrats hoarding food, plotting to reassert feudal privileges, and hiring mercenaries to quell dissent spread like wildfire, fueling anxiety and suspicion among the peasantry. The atmosphere of fear and uncertainty sparked spontaneous outbreaks of violence and unrest across rural France. Peasant mobs, emboldened by rumors of imminent aristocratic reprisals, launched attacks on manor houses, chateaux, and grain warehouses, seeking to seize food supplies and settle scores with their feudal landlords. The Great Fear was further fueled by the National Assembly's decision to abolish feudal privileges and serfdom in August 1789, following the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Peasants, inspired by the revolutionary ideals of liberty and equality, saw this as an opportunity to assert their rights and demand an end to feudal oppression. Peasant uprisings during the Great Fear often took on symbolic significance, with mobs destroying feudal records, burning legal documents, and demanding the abolition of feudal dues and obligations. These acts of defiance symbolized the rejection of feudalism and the old order, as peasants sought to assert their autonomy and rights. In some regions, peasant communities formed revolutionary committees and militias to coordinate their actions and defend against perceived threats from aristocratic reprisals. These grassroots organizations served as the vanguard of the revolutionary movement in rural areas, mobilizing support for the overthrow of the ancient regime. The outbreak of the Great Fear sent shockwaves through the French government, prompting fears of a peasant revolt and aristocratic backlash. The authorities responded by deploying troops to suppress the unrest and restore order, but their efforts were often hampered by the widespread nature of the uprisings and the determination of the peasants to resist. The Great Fear played a crucial role in destabilizing the ancient regime and accelerating the pace of revolutionary change in France. It exposed the vulnerabilities of the feudal system and highlighted the deep-seated grievances of the peasantry, paving the way for the abolition of feudalism and the establishment of a more egalitarian and democratic society. The Great Fear was a testament to the power of popular uprising and grassroots mobilization in shaping the course of the French Revolution. It brought to the forefront the plight of the peasantry and their demands for social justice and equality, leaving an indelible mark on the revolutionary struggle for liberty, equality, and fraternity in France. The abolition of feudalism in France, a cornerstone of the French Revolution, marked a profound transformation in the social, economic, and political landscape of the nation. This historic reform, enacted by the National Constituent Assembly in August 1789, heralded the end of centuries-old feudal privileges and ushered in a new era of modernity and equality. Under the ancient regime, France was governed by a feudal system characterized by hierarchical social structures and feudal privileges. Feudal lords, including the nobility and clergy, held vast landholdings and enjoyed feudal rights and privileges, while the peasantry labored under oppressive feudal obligations and restrictions. The feudal system perpetuated socio-economic injustice, with the peasantry bearing the brunt of feudal dues, obligations, and exploitation by the aristocracy. Peasants were subject to onerous taxes, corvée labor, and feudal dues, which often left them impoverished and marginalized. The peasantry, comprising the majority of the French population, harbored deep-seated grievances against the feudal system and its injustices. They resented the arbitrary exercise of feudal authority, the burden of feudal obligations, and the inequitable distribution of land and wealth. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, adopted by the National Assembly in August 1789, enshrined the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity as fundamental rights of all citizens. This landmark document served as a beacon of hope for the peasantry and a catalyst for revolutionary change. In response to mounting pressure from the peasantry and in adherence to the principles of the Declaration of the Rights of Man, the National Constituent Assembly abolished feudal privileges and serfdom in France. Feudal dues, Obligations and privileges were declared null and void, marking the end of feudalism as a legal and social institution. The abolition of feudalism paved the way for the redistribution of land and the dismantling of feudal estates. Land reforms aimed to break up large feudal holdings and redistribute land to the peasantry, thereby promoting greater land ownership and economic autonomy among rural communities. The abolition of feudalism emancipated the peasantry from centuries of feudal oppression and exploitation. Peasants were freed from feudal dues, obligations, and restrictions, granting them greater freedom and autonomy over their land and livelihoods. The abolition of feudalism had far-reaching implications for the social structure of French society. It dismantled the feudal hierarchy, eroded the power and privilege of the aristocracy, and paved the way for a more egalitarian and meritocratic social order based on principles of citizenship and equality before the law. The abolition of feudalism represented a watershed moment in French history, signaling the end of the ancient archaism and the birth of a new era of modernity and equality. It laid the groundwork for the establishment of a more democratic and egalitarian society, where citizenship and individual rights were enshrined as fundamental principles of governance. The abolition of feudalism in France was a defining moment of the French Revolution, symbolizing the triumph of liberty, equality, and fraternity over feudal oppression and injustice. It marked the beginning of a transformative period in French history, where the principles of the Enlightenment were translated into concrete political and social reforms, shaping the course of modern France. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, adopted by the National Assembly of France on August 26, 1789, stands as a seminal document in the history of modern democracy. Rooted in the principles of the Enlightenment, this revolutionary declaration enshrined fundamental rights and liberties as universal and inalienable, laying the groundwork for a new era of political and social reform. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen was inspired by the philosophical principles of the Enlightenment, which emphasized reason, individualism, and natural rights. Influential Enlightenment thinkers, such as Rousseau, Montesquieu, and Voltaire, advocated for the protection of individual liberties and the establishment of democratic governance. The Declaration affirmed the inherent and inalienable rights of all individuals, including the rights to liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. It proclaimed the principle of equality before the law, asserting that all citizens were entitled to equal protection and treatment under the law, regardless of social status or privilege. The Declaration asserted the principle of popular sovereignty, declaring that political authority derived from the consent of the governed. It affirmed the right of the people to participate in the formation of laws and policies through representative government, marking a significant departure from the absolute monarchy of the ancient archaism. The Declaration enumerated specific rights and freedoms that were deemed essential to the dignity and well-being of individuals. These included the rights to freedom of speech, press, and religion, as well as the right to a fair trial and the prohibition of arbitrary arrest and detention. The Declaration placed limits on the exercise of governmental power, affirming that government exists to protect the rights and liberties of citizens and that any actions or laws that violated these rights were illegitimate. It emphasized the need for checks and balances to prevent tyranny and abuse of power. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen exerted a profound influence on the development of modern democracy and human rights. Its principles of individual liberty, equality before the law, and popular sovereignty became foundational principles of democratic governance and inspired subsequent declarations of rights and constitutions around the world. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen served as a precursor to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. Many of the principles and rights enshrined in the French Declaration were incorporated into the Universal Declaration, reflecting its enduring relevance and influence. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen symbolized the aspirations and ideals of the French Revolution, embodying the spirit of liberty, equality, and fraternity that animated the revolutionary struggle. It became a rallying cry for reformers and revolutionaries around the world, inspiring movements for democracy and human rights. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen left a lasting legacy as a foundational document of modern democracy and human rights. Its principles continue to shape the political and legal landscape of France and serve as a beacon of hope for those seeking to uphold the rights and dignity of individuals worldwide. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen remains a testament to the enduring power of ideas and principles to inspire revolutionary change and shape the course of history. Its proclamation of universal rights and liberties laid the groundwork for the establishment of democratic governance and became a touchstone for the struggle for freedom and equality around the world. The Women's March on Versailles, also known as the October March or the October Days, was a pivotal event during the French Revolution that demonstrated the power of popular protest and precipitated significant political change. Taking place on October 5 to 6, 1789, this mass demonstration of predominantly working-class women from Paris to Versailles was fueled by economic hardship, food shortages, and frustration with the monarchy, ultimately leading to the transfer of the royal family from Versailles to Paris. The march was spurred by economic hardships exacerbated by rising bread prices, food shortages, and widespread poverty in Paris. Women, who were often responsible for providing food for their families, bore the brunt of these economic difficulties and were deeply affected by the scarcity of bread and other essential goods. Shortages of grain and bread had become increasingly severe in Paris, leading to long lines at bakeries and escalating tensions among the populace. Bread, as a staple food, symbolized the basic needs and survival of the working class, making the shortage a focal point of popular discontent. Rumors spread throughout Paris that the royal court at Versailles, located just outside the city, was hoarding food while the people of Paris suffered from hunger. This perceived indifference and extravagance of the monarchy fueled resentment and anger among the working class population. On October 5th, thousands of women, joined by men and members of the National Guard, marched from Paris to Versailles to demand action from King Louis XVI and the National Assembly. They carried weapons, banners, and symbols of their suffering, chanting slogans demanding bread and calling for the king to address their grievances. Upon reaching Versailles, the protesters confronted the royal palace, demanding to see the king and queen. The tense standoff between the crowd and the royal guards escalated into violence, resulting in casualties on both sides and increasing the intensity of the protest. Faced with the escalating crisis and fearing for the safety of the royal family, King Louis XVI reluctantly agreed to meet with representatives of the protesters. He ultimately acquiesced to their demands, promising to address their grievances and accompany them back to Paris. In the early hours of October 6th, the royal family, accompanied by the crowd of protesters, embarked on a journey from Versailles to Paris. The procession, which included the king, queen, and their entourage, as well as thousands of demonstrators, marked a symbolic shift in power from the monarchy to the people. The Women's March on Versailles was a turning point in the French Revolution, demonstrating the power of popular protest and the ability of ordinary citizens, particularly women, to effect political change. It forced the royal family to acknowledge the grievances of the people and signaled a shift in power dynamics that would ultimately lead to the downfall of the ancient regime. The Women's March on Versailles has been celebrated as a pivotal moment in the history of women's participation in political movements. It highlighted the role of women as agents of change and contributed to the broader struggle for equality and social justice during the French Revolution and beyond. The Women's March on Versailles was a dramatic demonstration of popular discontent and a powerful assertion of the rights and demands of the working class during the French Revolution. It underscored the importance of bread and economic hardship as catalysts for political action and laid the groundwork for further revolutionary upheaval that would reshape the course of French history. The civil constitution of the clergy, enacted by the National Constituent Assembly in France on July 12, 1790, was a landmark piece of legislation that reformed the relationship between the Roman Catholic Church and the state. This revolutionary measure aimed to bring the clergy under state control, curb the power and influence of the Roman Catholic Church, and promote principles of religious freedom and secularism. The French Revolution challenged the entrenched power and privileges of the Roman Catholic Church, which had long enjoyed significant influence over French society and politics. The clergy, particularly the higher clergy, held vast wealth and landholdings and wielded considerable political power. The civil constitution of the clergy sought to achieve several key objectives. subordination of the clergy to the state, redistribution of church property, standardization of the church hierarchy, promotion of religious tolerance and freedom. The civil constitution of the clergy aimed to subordinate the clergy to the authority of the state by requiring all clergy members to take an oath of loyalty to the new revolutionary government. This oath, known as the Civil Constitution Oath, required clergy to pledge allegiance to the Constitution and submit to state control. One of the most controversial aspects of the civil constitution was the redistribution of church property. The legislation mandated the seizure and sale of church lands and assets, with the proceeds used to finance the state and alleviate financial hardship. This measure was intended to weaken the economic power of the church and redistribute wealth more equitably. The civil constitution sought to standardize the structure of the Roman Catholic Church in France by reorganizing the church hierarchy along administrative lines. It abolished the traditional diocesan boundaries and replaced them with new administrative divisions known as departments, each governed by an elected bishop. The civil constitution of the clergy faced significant opposition from the clergy, particularly the higher clergy and the papacy. Many clergy members refused to take the civil constitution oath, viewing it as an infringement on their religious freedom and an affront to the authority of the Pope. The implementation of the civil constitution of the clergy deepened the division within the Catholic Church between those clergy who supported the revolutionary reforms and those who remained loyal to the papacy. This division contributed to a schism within the French Catholic Church and exacerbated tensions between the Church and the revolutionary government. While the civil constitution aimed to promote principles of religious freedom and tolerance, its implementation sparked controversy and division within French society. The requirement for clergy to take an oath of loyalty to the state and the confiscation of church property were viewed by many as violations of religious freedom and provoked resistance from devout Catholics. The civil constitution of the clergy represented a significant attempt to reform the relationship between the Roman Catholic Church and the state during the French Revolution. While it aimed to promote principles of religious freedom and secularism, its implementation sparked controversy and division within French society and contributed to ongoing tensions between the Church and the state. The civil constitution of the clergy was a pivotal piece of legislation during the French Revolution that sought to redefine the relationship between the Roman Catholic Church and the state. While it aimed to promote principles of religious freedom and secularism, its implementation sparked controversy and division within French society and contributed to ongoing tensions between the Church and the revolutionary government. The French Revolution witnessed the emergence of diverse political factions, each advocating for different visions of governance and societal transformation. As the revolution unfolded, ideological differences, competing interests, and divergent interpretations of revolutionary principles led to the formation of political factions that shaped the course of revolutionary events and ultimately influenced the trajectory of French politics. In the early stages of the revolution, unity and common purpose characterized the revolutionary movement as various factions joined forces to challenge the ancient regime and advocate for political and social reform. The Estates General and the National Assembly served as forums for debate and deliberation, with representatives from different factions working together to draft key revolutionary documents such as the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. One of the most prominent political rivalries during the Revolution was between the Girondins and the Jacobins. The Girondins, representing the moderate faction of the Revolution, advocated for a constitutional monarchy and gradual reform. They were largely composed of provincial deputies and favored decentralized government. In contrast, the Jacobins, led by figures such as Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton, espoused radical republican ideals and called for the abolition of the monarchy and the establishment of a democratic republic. They enjoyed support from urban workers and the sans-culottes and advocated for centralized government and direct democracy. Within the Jacobin faction, a further split occurred between the Montagnards and the more moderate members of the Jacobin Club. The Montagnards, or the Mountain, were a radical faction within the Jacobin Party who advocated for more extreme measures to advance the revolutionary cause. They played a leading role in the radicalization of the revolution and the Reign of Terror. Another influential faction during the revolution was the Cordeliers, a radical club led by figures such as Jean-Paul Marat and Jacques H. Bert. The Cordeliers advocated for more radical social and economic reforms, including the redistribution of wealth and the abolition of private property. The sans-culottes, meaning without breeches, were urban workers and artisans who played a significant role in revolutionary Paris. They were characterized by their radical political beliefs, militant activism, and distinctive attire. The sans-culottes often aligned with more radical factions such as the Jacobins and the Cordeliers. The rise of political factions led to increasing polarization and conflict within revolutionary France. Debates over the direction of the revolution, the role of the monarchy, and the distribution of power often led to heated confrontations between rival factions in the National Convention and other revolutionary institutions. The rivalry between political factions reached its peak during the Reign of Terror, a period of mass executions and political repression orchestrated by the Committee of Public Safety, dominated by the Montagnards. Thousands of perceived enemies of the revolution, including Girondin deputies, nobles, and counter-revolutionaries, were executed during this period of revolutionary violence. The excesses of the Reign of Terror ultimately led to a backlash against the radical faction of the revolution and the downfall of Robespierre and the Montagnards. The Thermidorian reaction, named after the month of Thermidor in the French Republican calendar, marked a conservative turn in French politics and the gradual dismantling of radical revolutionary institutions. Following the Thermidorian reaction, power shifted to the more conservative members of the National Convention, leading to the establishment of the Directory in 1795. The Directory, a 5-member executive council, governed France until its overthrow by Napoleon Bonaparte in the coup of 18 Brumaire. The rise of political factions during the French Revolution reflects the complexities and contradictions of revolutionary ideals and the challenges of forging consensus in times of profound social and political upheaval. The competing visions and interests of different factions shaped the course of revolutionary events and influenced the trajectory of French politics for years to come. The rise of political factions during the French Revolution reflects the fragmented and contested nature of revolutionary ideals and the diverse interests and ideologies that animated the revolutionary movement. The rivalry between factions such as the Girondins and the Jacobins, and the conflicts that ensued, played a pivotal role in shaping the course of revolutionary events and ultimately influencing the trajectory of French politics during this turbulent period in history. The execution of Louis XVI, King of France, on January 21, 1793, marked a pivotal moment in the French Revolution and symbolized the radicalization of revolutionary ideals. This dramatic event, which took place during the height of the Reign of Terror, represented the culmination of years of political turmoil, social upheaval, and ideological conflict, ultimately leading to the downfall of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic. Louis XVI's reign was characterized by political instability, economic hardship, and social unrest, exacerbated by his inability to address the mounting grievances of the French people. The monarchy's financial crisis, exacerbated by costly wars and extravagant spending at court, fueled resentment among the populace and eroded support for the monarchy. The revolutionary fervor that swept through France in 1789 led to the abolition of the absolute monarchy and the establishment of a constitutional monarchy. Louis XVI was stripped of his powers and became a constitutional monarch, but tensions between the monarchy and revolutionary forces continued to escalate. In June 1791, Louis XVI attempted to flee France with his family in an ill-fated attempt to escape the growing revolutionary fervor and seek support from foreign powers. The king's flight to Varennes and his subsequent capture and return to Paris further eroded public trust in the monarchy and fueled calls for his removal. The radicalization of the revolution, particularly after the fall of the Girondins and the ascendancy of the Montagnards in the National Convention, intensified calls for the king's execution. Radical Jacobin leaders, including Maximilien Robespierre, advocated for the abolition of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic based on principles of popular sovereignty and equality. Louis XVI was brought to trial before the National Convention on charges of treason and conspiring against the liberty of the nation. After a highly contentious trial, marked by impassioned speeches and ideological debates, the convention voted to convict the king and sentence him to death by guillotine. On the morning of January 21st, 1793, Louis XVI was executed by guillotine in the Place de la Révolution, now Place de la Concorde in Paris. His execution was a public spectacle, attended by thousands of spectators, and symbolized the triumph of revolutionary justice over the tyranny of the monarchy. The execution of Louis XVI sent shockwaves throughout Europe and marked a decisive break with the past. It signaled the end of the ancient regime and the beginning of a new era of republican government in France. The event galvanized support for the revolution among republicans and radicals, while also fueling fears and opposition among monarchies across Europe. The execution of Louis XVI remains one of the most iconic and controversial moments of the French Revolution. It symbolized the radicalization of revolutionary ideals, the triumph of popular sovereignty, and the pursuit of justice in the face of tyranny. The event continues to provoke debate and reflection on the nature of revolution, justice, and the role of monarchy in society. The execution of Louis XVI had far-reaching consequences for France and Europe. It intensified the domestic and international conflicts of the French Revolutionary Wars and contributed to the rise of radical Jacobinism and the Reign of Terror. The event also sparked widespread condemnation and hostility from monarchies across Europe, leading to the formation of anti-French coalitions and the outbreak of the Napoleonic Wars. The execution of Louis XVI was a defining moment in the French Revolution, symbolizing the radical transformation of French society and the establishment of a republican government based on principles of popular sovereignty and equality. While controversial and divisive at the time, the event remains a potent symbol of revolutionary justice and the struggle for liberty, equality, and fraternity in the annals of French history. The Reign of Terror, spanning from September 1793 to July 1794, was a period of intense political repression and violence during the French Revolution, marked by mass executions, arbitrary arrests, and state-sponsored terror. This dark chapter in French history was characterized by the radicalization of revolutionary ideals and the consolidation of power by the radical Jacobin faction, led by figures such as Maximilien Robespierre. The Reign of Terror unfolded amidst a backdrop of internal and external threats to the French Revolution. Internally, the revolution faced challenges from counter-revolutionary forces, royalist uprisings, and political factions vying for power. Externally, France was embroiled in the French Revolutionary Wars, facing invasion from foreign powers opposed to the revolutionary government. To address the mounting crises facing the revolution, the National Convention established the Committee of Public Safety in April 1793, led by radicals such as Maximilien Robespierre, Georges Danton, and Jean-Paul Marat. The committee was granted sweeping powers to oversee the defense of the revolution and suppress internal dissent. The Reign of Terror was justified by its proponents as a necessary measure to defend the revolution from its enemies and safeguard the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The Committee of Public Safety argued that revolutionary ideals were under threat from internal and external enemies, necessitating extraordinary measures to root out counter-revolutionary elements and preserve the gains of the revolution. One of the most infamous measures of the Reign of Terror was the Decree of Suspects, passed by the National Convention in September 1793. This decree authorized the arrest and prosecution of individuals suspected of counter-revolutionary activities or sympathies, leading to widespread persecution and arbitrary detention of perceived enemies of the revolution. Revolutionary tribunals were established to try suspected counter-revolutionaries and enemies of the revolution. These tribunals, characterized by summary proceedings and lack of due process, handed down thousands of death sentences, often based on flimsy or fabricated evidence. The guillotine became the symbol of revolutionary justice, as thousands of individuals, including nobles, clergy, revolutionaries, and ordinary citizens, were executed during the Terror. The Reign of Terror was accompanied by efforts to promote a new revolutionary religion based on the worship of the Supreme Being. Robespierre, influenced by Enlightenment ideas and Rousseau's concept of the general will, sought to replace traditional religion with a civic religion that celebrated virtue, patriotism, and revolutionary ideals. The Festival of the Supreme Being, held in June 1794, was a grandiose attempt to institutionalize this new religion, but it failed to gain widespread support. The excesses of the Reign of Terror including the arrest and execution of prominent revolutionaries such as Georges Danton and the execution of King Louis XVI, provoked growing opposition and disillusionment among moderates and former supporters of the revolution. In July 1794, the National Convention, fearing the unchecked power of the Committee of Public Safety, turned against Robespierre and his allies in what became known as the Thermidorian Reaction. Robespierre and his associates were arrested and executed, marking the end of the Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror left a lasting legacy of fear, violence, and political instability in France. It represented a dark chapter in the history of the French Revolution, tarnishing the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity with the bloodshed and brutality of revolutionary violence. The Terror also contributed to the rise of authoritarianism and the consolidation of power by military strongmen such as Napoleon Bonaparte, who would eventually seize control of France and establish himself as emperor. The Reign of Terror raised profound questions about the nature of revolutionary ideals and the limits of revolutionary violence. It sparked debates about the relationship between liberty and security, the role of the state in protecting revolutionary gains, and the ethics of political violence in the pursuit of social and political change. The excesses of the Terror also fueled criticisms of radical Jacobinism and contributed to a backlash against revolutionary extremism. The Reign of Terror was a defining moment in the French Revolution, characterized by the radicalization of revolutionary ideals and the consolidation of power by the radical Jacobin faction. It represented a dark chapter in French history, marked by mass executions, arbitrary arrests, and state-sponsored terror. While justified by its proponents as a necessary measure to defend the revolution, the Terror left a lasting legacy of fear, violence, and political instability, raising profound questions about the nature of revolutionary ideals and the ethics of political violence in the pursuit of social and political change. The Thermidorian Reaction, named after the month of Thermidor in the French Republican calendar, was a pivotal event during the French Revolution that led to the downfall of Maximilien Robespierre and the radical Jacobin faction, taking place in July 1794. The Thermidorian Reaction marked a turning point in the revolution, signaling the end of the Reign of Terror and the beginning of a more moderate phase of French politics. The Reign of Terror, characterized by mass executions, arbitrary arrests, and state-sponsored violence, had plunged France into a state of fear and instability. Under the leadership of the radical Jacobins, particularly Maximilien Robespierre, the Committee of Public Safety wielded dictatorial powers in the name of defending the revolution against perceived enemies. As the excesses of the Reign of Terror became increasingly apparent, opposition to Robespierre and the radical Jacobins grew within the National Convention and among the general populace. Many moderates, former revolutionaries, and even former allies of Robespierre became disillusioned with the radical direction of the revolution and sought to end the violence and restore political stability. The turning point of the Thermidorian Reaction came on July 27, 1799, Thermidor in the French Republican calendar, when Robespierre delivered a speech in the National Convention accusing his political opponents of treason and calling for their arrest. This speech provoked a backlash from members of the convention who feared Robespierre's growing power and authoritarian tendencies. In a dramatic turn of events, Robespierre and his allies were declared outlaws and arrested by the National Convention. Robespierre, along with several of his associates, was taken into custody and imprisoned. The arrest of Robespierre marked the end of his reign of terror and the beginning of the Thermidorian Reaction. With Robespierre's arrest, the Committee of Public Safety, which had wielded dictatorial powers during the Reign of Terror, was dismantled. Many of its members were purged from power, and the remaining members were forced to relinquish their authority as the revolution entered a new phase of moderation and political reform. One of the immediate consequences of the Thermidorian Reaction was the abolition of the revolutionary tribunals and the suspension of the draconian laws enacted during the Reign of Terror. The climate of fear and suspicion that had pervaded revolutionary France began to dissipate as political repression eased and the focus shifted towards reconciliation and rebuilding. While the Thermidorian Reaction brought an end to the most extreme excesses of the revolution, it also triggered a reactionary backlash against radical Jacobinism and the ideals of the revolution. Many former revolutionaries and members of the National Convention who had supported the radical Jacobins during the Reign of Terror were now targeted for persecution and reprisals. In the aftermath of the Thermidorian Reaction, a more moderate government emerged in France, characterized by a coalition of former revolutionaries, moderates, and conservatives. The National Convention was reorganized, and new political institutions were established to govern France during this period of transition and political realignment. The Thermidorian reaction represented a decisive break with the radical phase of the French Revolution and the beginning of a more moderate and conservative phase of French politics. While it brought an end to the reign of terror and the excesses of revolutionary violence, it also marked the beginning of a period of political instability and uncertainty as France struggled to define its identity and future direction. The Thermidorian reaction was a pivotal event during the French Revolution that led to the downfall of Maximilien Robespierre and the radical Jacobin faction. While it brought an end to the reign of terror and the most extreme excesses of revolutionary violence, it also triggered a reactionary backlash against radical Jacobinism and the ideals of the revolution. The Thermidorian reaction marked the beginning of a more moderate and conservative phase of French politics, characterized by political realignment and a quest for stability and reconciliation in the aftermath of years of revolutionary turmoil. The Directory, established in France in 1795, marked a significant transition in the aftermath of the French Revolution. Following the tumultuous period of the Reign of Terror and the fall of Robespierre, the Directory sought to restore political stability and establish a more moderate form of government. Lasting from 1795 to 1799, the Directory was characterized by political intrigue, economic challenges, and military conflict, ultimately paving the way for the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and the end of the revolutionary era. The Directory was established on November 2, 1795, following the dissolution of the National Convention. It consisted of 5 directors who held executive power, along with 2 legislative councils, the Council of Ancients and the Council of 500. The Directory was intended to provide a balance of power between executive and legislative branches, as well as a check on radicalism and extremism. Despite its formation, the Directory faced immediate challenges to its authority. Political factions and rivalries persisted, and the government struggled to assert control over the country. The Directory also faced opposition from royalists, radicals, and military leaders who sought to challenge its legitimacy and influence. The Directory inherited a struggling economy ravaged by years of war, inflation, and financial mismanagement. Efforts to stabilize the economy and address fiscal challenges proved difficult, leading to widespread discontent and social unrest among the populace. The Directory faced external threats from foreign powers opposed to the revolution, particularly Britain, Austria, and Prussia. Despite early setbacks, French forces achieved notable victories under the leadership of generals such as Napoleon Bonaparte, who rose to prominence during this period. However, military successes were often overshadowed by defeats and setbacks, particularly in the ongoing war with Britain. In September 1797, the Directory survived a coup attempt by royalists and conservatives known as the coup of 18 Fructidor. Led by Paul Barras and supported by Napoleon Bonaparte, the coup resulted in the expulsion of royalist deputies from the councils and the consolidation of power by the Directory. The Directory's continued instability and inability to address mounting challenges eventually led to its downfall. In November 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte staged a coup known as the coup of 18 Brumaire, overthrowing the Directory and establishing himself as First Consul of France. This marked the end of the revolutionary era and the beginning of Napoleon's rise to power. The Directory is often remembered as a period of political instability, corruption, and economic hardship in post-revolutionary France. Despite its efforts to establish a more moderate and stable form of government, the Directory ultimately failed to address the underlying issues facing France in the aftermath of the revolution. Its legacy is overshadowed by the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and the end of the revolutionary experiment. The downfall of the Directory and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte marked a significant shift in French politics and the consolidation of power in the hands of a single individual. Napoleon's rise to power and eventual establishment of the First French Empire marked the end of the revolutionary era and the beginning of a new chapter in French history. The Directory era had a profound impact on French society, shaping political attitudes, institutions, and social dynamics in the post-revolutionary period. Despite its shortcomings and failures, the Directory played a crucial role in laying the groundwork for Napoleon's rule and the transformation of France into a modern, centralized state. The Directory was a pivotal period in post-revolutionary France, characterized by political instability, economic challenges, and military conflict. Despite its efforts to establish a more moderate form of government, the Directory ultimately failed to address the underlying issues facing France in the aftermath of the Revolution. Its legacy is overshadowed by the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and the end of the revolutionary experiment, marking a transition to a new era in French history. Napoleon Bonaparte's rise to power during the French Revolution and subsequent establishment of the First French Empire marked a transformative period in French and European history. From his humble beginnings as a Corsican artillery officer to his eventual ascent as Emperor of the French, Napoleon's ambition, military genius, and political acumen propelled him to prominence and shaped the course of modern history. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on the island of Corsica in 1769. He received a military education in mainland France and quickly rose through the ranks of the French army during the tumultuous years of the French Revolution. His military successes, particularly during the Italian campaigns of 1796 to 1797, earned him widespread acclaim and recognition as a brilliant military strategist. In November 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte staged a coup known as the coup of 18 Brumaire, overthrowing the Directory and establishing himself as First Consul of France. This marked the end of the revolutionary era and the beginning of Napoleon's rise to power. Napoleon's coup was supported by a coalition of political elites, military officers, and conservative factions disillusioned with the instability of the Directory. As First Consul, Napoleon embarked on a series of reforms aimed at consolidating his power and centralizing authority in France. He introduced the Napoleonic Code, a comprehensive legal code that codified laws and established principles of equality, property rights, and individual freedoms. Napoleon also implemented administrative reforms, centralized government institutions, and promoted economic development and infrastructure projects. Napoleon's military campaigns during the Napoleonic Wars expanded French influence across Europe and solidified his reputation as a military genius. He achieved stunning victories against European coalitions in battles such as Austerlitz 1805, Jena Auerstedt 1806, and Wagram 1809, establishing France as the dominant power on the continent. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte proclaimed himself Emperor of the French, effectively ending the French Republic and establishing the First French Empire. His coronation ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris symbolized his ambition to restore order and stability in post-revolutionary France and establish a new imperial dynasty. As emperor, Napoleon implemented a wide range of reforms aimed at modernizing and centralizing the French state. He reorganized local government, established a system of prefects to oversee administrative regions, and introduced merit-based appointments to government positions. Napoleon also initiated reforms in education, finance, and infrastructure to promote economic development and national unity. Napoleon's continental system was an economic blockade designed to isolate Britain and weaken its economy by prohibiting trade with European countries under French control. While initially successful in disrupting British trade, the continental system ultimately proved ineffective and contributed to economic hardship in France and other European countries. Napoleon's military defeats in the Peninsular War, the invasion of Russia, and the Battle of Leipzig 1813 weakened his grip on power and led to his eventual downfall. In 1814, after a series of military setbacks, Napoleon abdicated the throne and was exiled to the island of Elba. However, he escaped exile and briefly returned to power during the 100 Days in 1815 before suffering final defeat at the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon Bonaparte's legacy is complex and multifaceted. He is remembered as a military genius, a visionary leader, and a skilled administrator who implemented sweeping reforms that transformed France and left a lasting impact on European politics and society. However, Napoleon's aggressive expansionism, authoritarian rule, and disregard for democratic principles also sparked resistance and opposition, contributing to the rise of nationalism and the eventual collapse of his empire. Napoleon Bonaparte's rise to power and establishment of the First French Empire marked a transformative period in French and European history. From his humble beginnings as a Corsican artillery officer to his ascent as Emperor of the French, Napoleon's ambition, military prowess, and political acumen reshaped the political landscape of Europe and left a complex and enduring legacy that continues to be studied and debated by historians to this day. The French Revolution, spanning from 1789 to 1799, left an indelible mark on the course of modern history. Its legacy reverberates across political, social, and cultural spheres, shaping the development of nations and influencing movements for liberty, equality, and fraternity around the world. From the rise of democratic ideals to the impact on international relations, the legacy of the French Revolution continues to resonate in the 21st century. The French Revolution played a pivotal role in advancing democratic ideals and principles of popular sovereignty, individual rights, and representative government. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, adopted in 1789, served as a cornerstone of democratic thought and inspired subsequent movements for civil liberties and human rights. One of the most significant legacies of the French Revolution was the abolition of feudal privileges and the establishment of legal equality before the law. The revolution dismantled the feudal system, abolished noble privileges, and laid the groundwork for a more egalitarian society based on merit and citizenship. The French Revolution fueled the rise of nationalism as a powerful force in modern politics. The revolutionary emphasis on national sovereignty and the concept of the nation-state inspired nationalist movements across Europe and beyond, shaping the map of the modern world and influencing struggles for independence and self-determination. The French Revolution had profound implications for international relations, challenging established monarchies and sparking conflicts across Europe. The revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity clashed with conservative forces and led to a series of wars and revolutions that reshaped the balance of power on the continent. The French Revolution laid the foundation for the rise of modern political movements, including liberalism, socialism, and communism. The revolutionary experience inspired thinkers and activists to advocate for social and political reform, leading to the emergence of diverse ideologies and movements that continue to shape politics and society today. The French Revolution had a significant impact on art, literature, and culture, inspiring a wave of artistic expression and creativity. Artists and writers such as Jacques-Louis David, Eugène Delacroix, and Victor Hugo depicted revolutionary themes and ideals in their works, capturing the spirit of the age and shaping the cultural landscape of the 19th century. The legacy of the French Revolution is also marked by the excesses of revolutionary violence and the reign of terror. The radicalization of revolutionary ideals and the use of state-sponsored terror to suppress dissent left a dark shadow on the revolution's legacy, sparking debates about the ethics of political violence and the limits of revolutionary change. The French Revolution had a complex impact on women's rights, inspiring feminist activists to demand greater equality and recognition. While the revolution initially failed to deliver on its promises of gender equality, it sparked debates about women's rights and laid the groundwork for subsequent movements for women's suffrage and emancipation. The legacy of the French Revolution is preserved and commemorated through various forms of memory and remembrance, including monuments, memorials, and cultural events. The Bastille Day celebrations on July 14th, marking the storming of the Bastille, serve as a reminder of the revolution's enduring impact and legacy. The legacy of the French Revolution is complex and multifaceted, encompassing a range of political, social, and cultural transformations that continue to shape the modern world. From the rise of democratic ideals to the impact on international relations, the French Revolution's legacy endures as a testament to the enduring power of revolutionary change and the quest for liberty, equality, and fraternity in the face of oppression and injustice. The French Revolution stands as a watershed moment in human history, symbolizing the struggle for liberty, equality, and fraternity against the backdrop of oppression and inequality. From its tumultuous beginnings in 1789 to its tumultuous end in 1799, the revolution transformed not only France, but also the course of modern civilization. Its legacy is far-reaching and multifaceted, shaping political ideologies, social movements, and cultural expressions around the world. The revolutionary ideals of democracy, human rights, and national sovereignty continue to inspire people to strive for a more just and equitable society. However, the revolution's legacy is also marked by its contradictions and complexities. While it brought about significant political and social changes, it was also marked by violence, extremism, and the suppression of dissent. The Reign of Terror, in particular, serves as a sobering reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and ideological fervor. Nevertheless, the French Revolution remains a beacon of hope and inspiration for those who seek to challenge oppression and build a better world. Its lessons continue to resonate in the ongoing struggle for justice, equality, and human dignity, reminding us of the enduring power of revolutionary change.